So don't clap yet because you haven't seen the presentation. It might suck. And I'm also a little nervous now because I'm thinking of everyone as tigers smiling at me. But so we're all here because we are talking about going beyond. We are all here because we want to restructure systems that we see as currently inadequate and unjust and not fit for the way that we operate in the world. With PLAN, or the Post Landfill Action Network, yes, we got many plan puns. We're planning to do a lot of things. Our focus is on the system of the linear consumption economy, which is basically the backbone of the capitalist system that we operate in that is clearly not functioning as we see fit at the moment. With PLAN, we actually inspire and empower students through leadership trainings and specific program guidance to help them to find waste solutions on their campus and eventually get them to quote-unquote zero waste. Now, I personally don't think zero waste is possible, but not from a cynical perspective, but from a realistic perspective, and we'll get more into that in a little bit. But I want to jump into the problem of waste first before I start to kind of talk about the solutions that we're thinking about. So in terms of the linear consumption economy, that backbone of capitalism, it is an extremely wasteful system. I think you all are pretty familiar with it. We extract virgin resources from the earth without much care for the land that we're ravaging or the people that we're ravaging with it. We produce goods, we manufacture them, we distribute them across the country, across the world, we consume them, and then very shortly after consuming them, all increasingly shorter and shorter time spans, we dispose of them. So at the end of the line with this model, there's always waste at the end. Something is always wasted. But what we don't realize is that at every point along the way, there's also waste associated with this model. So think about extraction, for example. You think about the slurries from coal mines and the amount of waste that has to be trucked off of mining sites and other extractive sites such as oil drilling. Or think about the distribution of food. We produce so much food in this country and in the world that is actually thrown away. And there's so many folks going hungry in the country despite us throwing out items because they are cosmetically challenged and don't meet consumer standards. And so this system, yes, is extremely wasteful. And waste is also a social issue. There's people functioning in every piece of this system, especially at the end of the line when we think about the siting of landfills and incinerators and the facilities in which we throw items away. Throwing something away in itself is a bit flawed. There is no real away, right? And so I really want to take some time to identify, what is that away that we're just trying to mindfully look the other way at. And so with the linear consumption economy, the disposal piece is what I really want to talk about, restructuring. And so to kind of put it in a social lens and give it the social perspective of how waste affects people and how it is a social issue and thus needs a social solution, I want to first talk about waste and the concept of climate change, something that I think we all realize that we interact with on a daily basis. Everyone is affected by it, but there are some populations that are affected unequivocally. And so when we think about landfills, we can think about greenhouse gas emissions. Landfills are actually 18% of our methane emissions within the US. Methane, as many of you know, is a potent greenhouse gas. And so when we're thinking about our impact on carbon emissions and how we can remedy that through maybe taking more cars off the road or more green energy options, if we're overlooking waste and our impact that we have waste-wise with landfills and incinerators, we're missing out a huge chunk of that piece. But why is it that landfills are giving us so much methane and so much greenhouse gases? Aren't they pretty safe? Aren't they lined well and you can capture the methane and turn it into energy? But that's not what we want to focus on. What we want to focus on. That's that reactive end of the line piece. So how do things get there in the first place? Well, we can think about food again. There's 21.6% usually is the volume of which a landfill is made up of just food waste. And that makes us kind of reflect on, okay, there's 40% of the food waste that we are producing in the country today that is thrown away. And meanwhile, we've got 12% of the country who are food insecure, otherwise known as not knowing where their next meal is going to come from. So that in itself is a huge issue in making up a massive amount of our waste. The second piece of that is that we can't overlook is kind of the physical materials that we consume every day. So think about single-use plastics, our water bottles, our plastic bags, and the more benign things like microbeads and our face washes and things like that. There's a massive amount of plastics within landfills and incinerators because a huge amount is not captured for recycling or reuse and is designed to be thrown away in the first place. According to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, by 2050, we are projected to see more plastic pollution in the ocean by volume than fish. And so that's not just the physical items that you see, in the very heart-wrenching videos of a sea turtle choking on, the ring of a soda can. But it's also the microplastics that break down, are smaller than the diameter of a pencil, so smaller than 5 millimeters, that break down and wash through our waterways and basically end up in our food chain and in our systems, so affecting us directly and our health. The existence of plastics and single-use items like that is it's a huge signifier of just kind of like our throwaway society, I like to call it. We have been trained that we need to consume things to make us feel better, to assuage our anxieties and our self-consciousness. The items that we consume are for a busy and fast-paced lifestyle, and with that results us to perpetuate this wasteful system, right? And it also kind of ends up labeling ourselves as valueless, and that we continue to consume items that are single-use and quickly thrown away. And I think that we can pretty quickly associate that with the value of ourselves as single-use and throwaway. It's evident in where we cite landfills and incinerators and these sites in which we have to throw items away in the first place. There's studies that have been done as early as 1987 by the Commission on Racial Equity that found that race was actually the predominant deciding factor on the siting of a hazardous material facility, most likely landfills, incinerators, things like that. And so why is that? Well, these populations are being deemed as less valuable, single-use, throwaway as the items that we are trying to escape and throw away. And so that's a little all doom and gloom. And so I'll just stop there and let you all figure it out. So no, I'm just kidding. It's a little doom and gloom, and so I don't want to focus on that because there are so many solutions out there to waste. What are they? For some of them, I guess actually I'd love to ask some of you all, like, what are some solutions to waste that you've seen? Throw anyone, hands up. Composting, that's a great one. Diverting items from the landfill, perfect. Anyone else?
Ugly fruit sales.
Ugly fruit sales, lovely. Beautiful. Anything else?
Smaller plates in the cafeteria.
Okay, yeah. So we're getting down to like individual change and things like that. But again, kind of going back to the system, those are all great things. And there are companies who are designing items that can be disposed of more correctly at the end of their life, whether it be more recyclable packaging or an object that is easy to recycle and not made out of so many different component parts. You have packaging that's being made out of like mushrooms and it can decompose at the end of its life. That's so awesome. Or you have legislation by cities and counties that is banning food waste from the landfill, so everything has to be composted. And then you've got entire institutions, businesses, colleges and universities setting goals to be zero waste, or what we define as 90% diversion by 2020, 2025, 2030, you name it. Some of you are probably familiar with some of those goals at your own institutions. But I have a little bit of an issue with diversion. Not because I want to burn everything in an incinerator. I do love dumpster diving, but that's not my issue. I want to take a little bit of a closer look at diversion. So the very simple equation, we look at diversion as the amount of material that is disposed of other than in the avenue of a landfill or incinerator, so recycling or composting, and then we divide it by the overall material that is being discarded, including our trash. So as you can see, this is still material being discarded. There's still material being processed that we have to ship off. There's still waste at the end of the day. Diversion tends to kind of like muddle our understanding of waste reduction a little bit. Diversion doesn't include, if you'll notice, those very radical acts of just like cultural interaction, interpersonal interaction. So like what about, when a student is on their campus and they are, running a student-run thrift store or a student-free store and a free shelf, and there's this very informal exchange of items amidst students. And they do it because they know it's the right thing and they've got an item that's totally usable, just not really usable for them anymore or not relevant to them. What about like surplus facilities within universities that gather everything that would be discarded, like all these chairs in the room, and rather than throwing it into the landfill are able to allocate it to somewhere else on campus or a community outlet. And so diversion, this is what my issue is we're still throwing materials away. We're not really reducing. And so to put it into the context, this is theoretical campuses here, but you've got campus A and campus B. Say they are roughly the same size. It's a couple of like small liberal arts institutions. And they're very much on the train of, yep, we're going to get to zero waste by 2030. And that's going to be 90% diversion for us. So both of them are at 60% diversion currently. Campus A is a little more wasteful, as we can see that their volume is pretty large, but on paper they look pretty good because they're like all those bottles that come in, they're recycling it all. It's great, it's awesome. The bags, perfect. They're at a 60% diversion rate. Good for them. They look great on paper, especially for these quantitative sustainability metrics that we're relying on so much as diversion. But then you look at Campus B and they've got the same diversion rate, but they have drastically reduced the volume of waste that they are producing. They have banned plastic bottles on campus. That's awesome. They've banned single-use plastic bags. They have created policy and procurement legislation on campus to ban styrofoam procurement on campus. And that has brought their overall recycling rate down because they just don't have as many materials to recycle, but it's also brought the sheer volume of waste down that they are functioning with. And so this is really getting to the heart of my issue with diversion, is it's not as holistic as we need to understand what waste reduction truly is on a campus. We can't be relying on zero waste as 90% diversion. We need to include the cultural and interpersonal interactions that take place every single day on a campus. But the tricky thing is those are really hard to quantify. And my proposal is that maybe we, as some of the other speakers have said, maybe we don't need to exactly quantify that. Or maybe we can find a really interesting way to quantify the qualifiable, to think about quality over quantity. And so my proposal is that we need to bring more people to the table. We need to be talking about waste, and we need to lean in about how waste isn't just about numbers. That waste is a matter of culture, it's a matter of self-meaning for students and staff on a campus or members of a community. It's about, recognizing that waste functions within a linear system that places a disvalue on people, the same type of system that's enabled, unfortunately, for three white men to come up here and telling you about how to go beyond. Which I'm a little baffled by, but that aside, those are conversations that we can continue to have, and those are conversations that we are having. And so to bring it kind of back to the solution that we're thinking about at Plan is how do we empower students to really think about the cultural exchanges that are happening, the interpersonal exchanges, and how they define waste on their campus, how they value and not waste people and not waste resources. And it does take a little bit of, a more logistical, like step-by-step process to kind of get there. And so what we're proposing is a program that we differently than the rest of the speakers that have been up here, is we're kind of in the pilot phase of this program. We're kind of waiting to see what happens, and to be completely transparent, we're not really sure how to measure the qualifiable pieces of waste on a campus yet, but we're working with campuses to do that. And so we're doing what is called a Zero Waste Atlas. And so we have created a very extensive checklist of sorts of kind of like, if you were to be on a campus and it was zero waste, what are all the ideal programs and initiatives and policies that would be in place? And we go to a campus and we interview representatives from every single department, even those departments that think like, we don't have anything to do with waste, we're not facilities, we're athletics. We interview every single person that is a representative of each department on a campus in each kind of like focus area. One, to just get a better understanding of overall operations on campus. Two, to bring them into the conversation. And three, to actually identify that like there's probably a lot going on that they don't know about on campus. You can go to a sustainability officer who's reporting to like an ASHE STARS report. Some of you might be familiar with that, but it's like sustainability reporting for higher education. And they'll tell you, oh yeah, we've got standardized bins and signage. Everyone knows how to use them all across campus. And then you go to the arts department and they're like, oh no, we just have kind of like a cardboard box that we throw the scraps into, but we didn't know that standardized bins and signage was a thing. So it's identifying those communication gaps. So we conduct really kind of intimate in-person interviews with folks on campus from each department to understand from them, okay, what are the operations within your facility? What does your waste infrastructure look like? And what's your understanding of waste? And then we take their responses and, kind of like academia requires, we give a report back. We write up a report where here's current characteristics, and here are the gaps that exist. Not only operationally, but here's the communication gaps that exist. Here's where one department thought one thing, whereas the sustainability office was advertising another. And so how do we bring all those people to the table? The next step is to really think about, okay, based on the geographic location, the demographic of this campus, what makes most sense for them to reduce their waste? So to bring that into context a little bit, there's so many different archetypes of campuses. If we are to judge a campus on their waste reduction efforts when maybe in that state, they don't have glass recycling. So for example, in the state of Wyoming, there's no glass recycling that exists. Yet at the University of Wyoming, they're making the effort to truck it all the way to Colorado, one state over where there is glass recycling infrastructure. And so when we're comparing campus to campus and we're trying to set a new standard and to actually define what zero waste is, what does that look like? And so this is where it gets really tricky, is by campus archetype, we're gonna have to figure out, okay, weighing all the pros and cons, the externalities, what makes most sense for you to do? Is it to identify logistics and routes to ship that glass recycling over to the next state or ship that composting over to a facility within the state that you're going to have to end up paying more for? Yeah, maybe that's a sacrifice they have to make. But before that, is it communicating on a greater level on campus to reduce and avert from waste in the first place? And so really thinking about, as we are identifying these gaps and recommending ways in which folks can fill those gaps, is what are the communication lines that we can think about here. And then the third step is basically creating a zero waste plan with them. And this is not an arbitrary, we're going to be zero waste by 2025, because goodness knows how we're going to get there. And there's diminishing returns as you continue to divert more and more trickier materials from the landfill. So we're working with them to say like, okay, what are the intentional conversations that we can have over the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years to start to foster an understanding of what waste means on your campus, and how to kind of have interpersonal and inter-peer communication for that. And set up systems so that students don't have to think about averting waste in the first place. So that goes back to those aversion policies like plastic and styrofoam isn't even coming into the campus in the first place, or every sort of material that a student is using has a proper outlet in which it can be taken apart and reused and taken back to the company that it was bought from, or reused in a student maker space or a repair space or something like that. And so the next step where we want to see this program is have student ambassadors on their campuses that are actually leading the evaluation effort. It's not us coming in. Yes, we can say, I dare say that I'm an expert in zero waste. I don't know about the title expert, but coming in as basically an outside view, being able to see the 30,000-foot view in the forest from the trees and wayfind on a campus, oh, these are the miscommunications that are going on. But what better a position to do that than a student on campus? They're there for only a couple of years. They're not engrossed in the bureaucracy and the administrative bustle of the campus. They're able to get an in and also be understood by staff and administrators that, oh, okay, this is a learning opportunity for students. But also it enables them to invest in the campus more and invest in the value of their campus as a resource and not see it as a waste, not be wasting their time on campus, but actually make a mark in which they are able to continue the conversation around the building of a culture that values resources. And so my solution is to be social. My solution is, yes, we want to reduce our waste, we want to recycle more, we want to compost more, we want to consume less, but really my challenge and my thinking beyond is like, hey, let's maybe lean into thinking a little bit more abstractly about waste. What is the value of not only materials but ourselves? And maybe we won't be able to measure that quite so tangibly at first, but we can at least have very meaningful conversations about it. And so I thank you so much for giving me the space to talk about this today and talk your ear off. And I would be happy to answer any questions or chat with folks more who are really particularly interested about waste. I'm personally an avid dumpster diver, so if you want some good tips, talk to me after. But yeah, thank you so much.